It seems that I am a terrorist, and here's how it happened. First, it was being called a racist that was the worst insult in the land. It meant that scandals like Rotherham, where men of mainly Pakistani heritage were sexually abusing underage white girls, went unreported. Now, I call them paedophile rings, and evidence suggests that they are in some 50 locations around the UK. Many who could expose it were either involved in it or they were afraid of being called racist, because most of the perpetrators were of Pakistani heritage. That is a fact. Instead, counsellors, police and those in the know appeared to turn a blind eye, or worse still, blame the girls themselves. Then the racist chalice was passed on to those calling out the illegal migrant crisis for what it is, an invasion. Gary Lineker likening the language to that of 1930s Germany, which is when the Nazis were in power. So basically suggesting you are a complete racist bigot if you believe that we are being invaded, which we are being, by the way. And only the other day, Sir Keir Starmer's buddy, Lord Hermer, suggesting that wishing to leave the ECHR was moving us closer to Nazism, thereby demonising anyone who wishes to leave the convention. But sadly, for those chucking out the racist slur, it's lost its power. Because when it comes to mass illegal migration, many white, Asian and black Britons agree that illegal migration, and in particular the boats, is wrong and unfair. Now, I cannot speak for others on this, but it is my view that many people of colour who came here via legal means are a bit peeved watching people from abroad abuse the system. So it no longer works to call people racist anymore for calling out the issue, as it seems that we are all racist then. So this insult is no longer powerful enough to deter people from speaking up. So get this, they are now suggesting that concern about mass migration is a terrorist ideology, which means that if you are concerned about it, like me, you're not a racist actually, you're a terrorist, which makes me one and you if you're concerned. You really couldn't make this up. Prevent guidance says that cultural nationalism, which encompasses the conviction that Western culture is under threat, could require referral to a radicalisation scheme. Prevent aims to identify people at risk of turning to terrorism. This is, of course, the Prevent programme which failed to stop Southport attacker Axel Rudakabana, who was referred to it on 3 occasions. People at risk of being labelled as extremists by the scheme include Douglas Murray and our very own Matt Goodwin on GB News. Really? In fact, even Sir Keir Starmer could be caught up in this after his Island of Strangers speech, which some people likened to one by Enoch Powell.
We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, that encourages some businesses to bring in lower paid workers rather than invest in our young people, or simply one that is sold by politicians to the British people on an entirely false premise, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo.
Well, it sounds like he's concerned about mass migration. Is he a terrorist? Lord Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, has written to the Home Secretary asking her to reconsider, warning that anyone referred to Prevent could face serious, long-lasting consequences for their education, employment and public reputation. I mean, this is ridiculous, because the irony, of course, that it's more likely that the terrorists would come here via a dinghy. Well, I'm joined now by the founder of the Sanctuary Foundation, Dr. Krish Kandiah. Krish, hello, welcome. Am I a terrorist? I am concerned about mass illegal migration, and I think you were concerned about it as well on my show last week.
No, you're not a terrorist. Of course you're not. The Prevent strategy in general is pretty sensible. It has all sorts of things in there. It's quite fair. It talks about left-wing extremists and right-wing extremists. It calls out white supremacy. I guess the idea behind this focus on a fear of mass migration is to say it might be one indicator amongst many. And on its own, I don't think it's obviously a sign that you're a terrorist. But if it was combined with some of the other things that are on there, which is interest in weapons or racism, then you might be worried. Look, xenophobia is the word that describes people that are fearful of strangers. And to be fearful of mass migration is perhaps understandable. There's a lot of rhetoric out there drumming up that fear, but it's not a good look to be fearful of strangers. I've seen strangers come to the UK from places like Ukraine and Hong Kong, and they were mass movements of people, 200,000 from Hong Kong, 200,000 from Ukraine, and most people are not scared of them. But they are scared sometimes because of the way the media whips them up about people coming from places like Africa and the Middle East. And that does sound a little bit xenophobic, that we're afraid of large groups of people coming. I don't think
that's quite true. I don't think that's quite true. I also noticed that you point out Axel Ruder, well, you haven't pointed out, but you pointed out that really and truly that there should be preventers there to stop people who have interest in terrorists and interest in... Well, Axel Ruder Kobana was referred to them on 3 occasions and they did nothing. You see, that's the problem when you've got some sort of organisation or some sort of scheme that is meant to deal with terrorists and it doesn't deal with them. It sounds like they are going for easy prey, like people who are concerned about terrorists, which actually, or terrorism, or people entering this country, which actually is quite a vague notion. But, I mean, look, we were always told never talk to strangers when we were younger. I was always taught that, weren't you? And I don't think you should talk to strangers, really, sometimes.
I talk to strangers a lot. I'm a foster parent. Oh, that's my dad trying to speak to me. Sorry. I speak to strangers quite a lot. I'm a foster parent. Sometimes a child that we've never met before needs to come and live with us. It's part of hospitality, showing kindness to people in need. Look, Nana, I agree with you that there is no way that the prevent strategy should have ignored all those warnings about Axel Ruder. That was completely out of order. You and I agreed on that. What he did was absolutely
horrendous.
But because a system isn't working, it doesn't mean you get rid of it. You might want to reform it and transform it. Maybe it needs more funding. Maybe it needs more power.
No, not more money. God, no. They can't get more money. Look, the problem here is that they are tinkering with language when they need to actually be acting. So it's even the founder, the person who sort of created the Prevent scheme, admitted that it really wasn't working that well. It's not really worked very well for de-radicalising people in prison. It doesn't work. We all know that. And it's not really working very well if they're going to be dealing with people who've expressed a concern about mass migration. Even the fact that they're prepared to put that down and show that that is one of the strategies is actually very worrying to me, because the bigger problem and the elephant in the room is, of course, the fact that we are literally being invaded by people coming here daily via these small boats on the channel, and they come here and they can then just go into British society without any real checks or balances until we've worked out who they are.
You and I are probably going to disagree on the language there. You know that of the net migration figures, people coming on boats is less than 6%. And you don't call people coming to work in our care homes or Americans that come and study in our universities, you don't call them an invasion.
I don't have to pay for them then. But I don't have to pay for them. They've come, they've followed the rules, they've got the job, they are putting something into the tax system, even if it isn't that much, but they're putting something in. So they are not a net drain on me. I object to people coming across the channel in that way and sponging off me when actually they're not fleeing war. Most of them are just fleeing nothing. They're fleeing France. And they are, a lot of them, as you saw with Patrick Christie's reporting, they're just expecting loads of freebies.
Nani, you and I agreed, actually. I don't think most refugees and asylum seekers I've ever met want to sponge off the state. They would like to work. They would like to be able to contribute to society. But our current setup doesn't allow them to do it. I think we can have a fast and fair immigration system that assesses people. It can send them back to countries where that's possible, and where they have got a valid claim, let's give them the right to work. Ukrainians and Hong Kong
you can't just do... Yeah, but then you act again like a draw, inviting people to come across via the dinghies, and you are going to give them a job now, you're going to give them work. It can't be that way. You need to stop that from happening. And it's totally acceptable and understandable why people are fearful of people who've come to this country in that way.
I'd love to give people an opportunity to actually sit down and meet people. I think some of their
Who've come in
fears
via
would be-
dinghy.
Well, if they're valid asylum seekers and refugees, for sure. Once you meet them, you'll have a very different view of them.
I think you're totally wrong with that. It's a lovely world that you live in, a rose-tinted world, and I wish I could exist there. But sadly, I don't. I live in the real one. Krish Kandiah, thank you very much. He's the founder of the Sanctuary Foundation, and he's just wearing these wonderful rose-tinted spectacles. But listen, on this issue, the Home Office have said Prevent is not about restricting debate or free speech, but about protecting those susceptible to radicalisation.